Greetings, folks. So today we're going to review Water Everywhere. So I'm just going to get it started. So over to Jeff for the introduction.
So yeah, that's Man and Machine. Episode 4, Water Everywhere, which was written by Robert De Laurentiis and Dick Wolf, same as all the other episodes so far, and directed by Alan Arkush. And the very brief description that I have says, Mann's neighbor, a food reporter, investigates the murder of another reporter who broke the story about a contaminated reservoir. And I think actually I saw another one-line description. Yeah, the one-line description says, Bobby and Eve link a watershed's contamination to illegal water bottling. That's like a real quick way to give away the entire plot. But
yeah.
But my first impression is to say that I thought this was a lot more fun episode than the last one. And you know, again, you could argue that the plot itself is not all that complicated, but it's still presented a little bit more in a mysterious way where we don't know very early on who the culprit is. So even though it's not, you know, necessarily who done it or whatever exactly, we've got a little bit more suspense to this one, which is why, to me, I thought it was more enjoyable. And we had some interesting side characters that were not necessarily presented as simple good or bad guys. So I always like that type of thing too, when you have more characters that are a little bit more nuanced. And you had some interesting speculation about future issues relating to water conservation, and we had our second. I don't think I mentioned it a couple weeks ago. There was a thing put in, obviously as a joke, but it's kind of interesting for somebody who is a sports fan who has followed things over the years. There was a joke in the second episode where the guy who was talking about getting tickets, talking about Clippers tickets. You know, in LA, they had two NBA teams, the Clippers and the Lakers. And the joke was basically like that everybody wanted to get the Clippers tickets and the Lakers tickets were cheap because nobody wanted them, which, of course, at the time the show was made, exactly the opposite was true. The Lakers were, you know, one of the best teams in the league, had won all these championships, and the Clippers were basically seen as a joke. You know, they never were in the playoffs. And so they put that in there, like with the idea that by whatever time in the future this is, things will be reversed. The irony of that is that there was a period several years ago where that pretty much was the case, where the Clippers were the more popular team. But now it's close to reverting back the other direction again, where the Lakers have become better. But so it did, in a sense, come true. Maybe not, and you know exactly when they thought it would. But anyway, that part was interesting. And there was a second line about that very briefly in this one, where the guy said something about the Clippers tickets being a hot item or something like that. But yeah, some interesting stuff like that. I'm trying to remember what else I was noting about that because I didn't write anything down or anything like that. That delivery guy in the picture was pretty cool. I don't know who that was. He didn't have any lines, but he had a great entrance.
Yeah.
And the coroner guy, I immediately recognized. I was like, it's Phil, because that was the longtime Night Court character that actor played. Will Ute played the homeless guy that was sort of like Dan's errand boy. Anyway, so he was an interesting character in this. We've had several works of fiction, so I don't know whether this is a true to life thing. We've had several shows where the medical examiners are portrayed as being a little bit loony.
Yeah, as if they're all NTPs.
They're kind of portrayed as if they're very they look at bodies as being very much as a sort of experiments, or, you know, things that they think of as test subjects and aren't at all thinking really about the the person themselves or the feelings involved or anything like that. So it definitely had that portrayed here, and including Eve and the coroner kind of bonding in their interest in talking about the various dissections of body parts, where Bobby is getting a little bit grossed out as he's trying to eat his Chinese food. So.
I think one of the reasons why the writers might do that is they might think, oh, okay, we're going to get a lot of jargon here, a lot of medical parlance, and we've got to try to get a little bit of humor in there to sort of break it up. And so they would go to the sort of quirky scientist.
Yeah, and in these pictures where we had the image of the Louisiana congressman appearance, which I think probably was already somewhat outdated in the early 90s, but especially by whenever this is supposed to be set. That particular character did, that type of stock character did exist once upon a time, but I think it was earlier. Maybe they were anticipating that it would come back into fashion. But anyway, that was kind of funny. But yeah, I liked kind of I say twists. It wasn't like they were huge twists or anything, but I liked the fact that it wasn't quite as cut and dried as some of the previous things, and it didn't seem like last week's where there was stuff just put in there to be bizarre without any real particular attachment to anything. Everything in this one, I think, sort of had a purpose, and it was well paced again, so I enjoyed most of it.
Yeah, I mean, the direction, there were some good transitions in there, in the direction, and with this sort of thing, I mean, it's difficult. It's difficult for me to criticize a television director because they don't have a lot of time, and they've got to fit in with the style of the show, and so basically, it's about just getting stuff done and sort of competently. And whereas maybe you might argue that maybe that previous episode was a little bit over directed with the weird stuff going on, and maybe the director adding too much in, that might be other people. I like this. I like the actor playing that small comedic fella, and I like the role, the contest with the chilies, and I mean, this is like in the future. There's no one twigged like, oh, she's a gynoid. Right, like always, it's like, oh, she's just an INTP. I mean, what? Why? I mean, the police has had androids before.
Yeah.
So
my guess is that there's probably some media attention that I would imagine they would have done stories about the police working on that sort of thing, but probably nobody knows to what extent. That there's been someone as convincing a model as her, I guess.
Yeah.
They're thinking of in terms of somebody that would very obviously be a robot or something. I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. I guess it's just not something they expect would cross most people's minds, even a guy who's a reporter.
Yeah. So she's only able to blend in because there's people like me, INTPs, that she could be pass off for a human being. Yeah. Oh, she's just an INTP.
I did check, by the way, because I was curious, and yes, last week's episode was a different director. It was Brian Grant. So I definitely think there seems like there was a difference in the style for sure.
Yeah, I mean, because you had the similar thing of him going undercover, and he went undercover in this. I think maybe early on, I think what came across as weak and also a little bit nonsensical was Bobby with the shower. Like, he's supposed to be an STP. It's like, just get it done. I ain't going to, like, if an STP wants to get the shower, and that's the main thing, I don't think they're going to stop to go to the door. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I guess if he was anticipating that it could be something that he really needed to deal with that was police related or something, or some kind of personal thing. So, who knows?
Yeah, I thought
who wouldn't be able to enjoy his shower if he was wondering who was at the door and who he didn't go to the door for. some people
Well,
are intensely curious. They have to know.
yeah. So I sort of said on my board, I'm taking away. He's losing artisan points for it's got. Oh, God, it's my duty to go to the door. It's like no, and it's like I would have. I mean, I would have continued even if it wasn't a water shortage. I'm like, I am not going to be rushed. I don't care who's there, but that's like me. That might be an introvert extrovert thing, where it's like, yeah, I don't really want to see who's at the door. I'm not in the mood to extrovert right now.
The other thing I saw when I saw the pictures of the pepper eating thing, it reminded me at the time that I watched it of Saturday Night Live had a sketch back in 2000. It was, I guess, November of 2000 because it was in between. It was after the presidential election, but before they had actually declared Bush officially the winner. So it was this sketch where it was George W. Bush and Al Gore, like they were hanging out, like that. It was implied that it was just like they were spending their time in between, with the waiting for the results, just sort of hanging out in different places. And so they were like eating at some restaurant in Texas, and there was this bowl of peppers on the table, and it has Bush saying like, Al, why don't you try one of these peppers, and Al says something like, no, you're not going to get me on that, George. You fooled me with that before or something. And he goes, no. These are some of those habanero peppers. They're real mild. And so he takes a bite of one and, yeah, I got you again, Al. Anyway, that reminded me of that. But,
Yeah. So before I get into the actual show, I think something interesting came up in terms of temperament, and we touched on it a little bit last week. Without going into that, it's sort of like when we talked a little bit about luck, and that thing where Kersey wrote about artisans are cynical that life has a great grand purpose to it, a grand reason for things happening. And here you had this thing where, and then they did it in that final scene about where Bobby was saying that life is like the weather, that it can't be predictable. And I'm wondering from your point of view, Jeff, and it would be, and you like it that way. Is that true?
I mean, for the most part, I guess, it kind of depends on, I guess there's some things I'm fine with being predictable. and those are kind of the basic, when they talk about like the needs of people or whatever, like, I enjoy, like, I like to believe that on a day-to-day basis, I'm going to like have food and shelter, that sort of thing. I feel like I could survive in a situation where I didn't, and I had to like fend for, and actually like scavenge for things on a daily basis. But just from a comfort level, I prefer not having to do that. So there are certain elements that I would prefer were not unpredictable. But even within those, there are things like I've talked about my diet before in terms of if I would rather just be able to, well, I mean, not just diet, but anything, just on a day-to-day basis. My ideal life would be wake up and then figure out what I want to do then, not have anything scheduled or set. And there are very few days that's actually the case. There's usually something. Yeah. And even if it is true for a day, then it's, after a certain number of days, that's coming to an end. So there's always limits, and which I have come to the conclusion that that's probably a good thing overall, that there are some limits, but it's still never my preference. So it's sort of like, that's why I've talked about like that kind of relationship where the artisans need structure so they can push against the structure. And if you really have no structure, then that's when things get kind of dangerous. So we might say that we want it to be that way, but those of us that are like mature enough to sort of learn what it is that we encounter in life and how we react to it actually know that we need that, even if it's not what we would say our preference is.
It's also maybe a little bit more of a challenge when it's like, when you've not got that. And I think you said before that, say you've got a celebrity and it's like the world is at their feet and it's like, well, they've almost got too much freedom. And then they sort of have to go towards extreme
Right.
stuff.
That's when they end up, getting in trouble with the law or other things like that because um, they don't have anyone who's placing the limits on them.
And
You know,
here's the way. If you look at Yancy Butler's private life, she's probably, like, you could argue a little bit towards that. She's probable ESFP. Like, she's had these kind of things in her private life. So that's quite. You got an ESFP playing an INTP, but so for instance, drunken, disorderly, and other things like that. Though I don't wish to slander her, but that type of thing. So you might peg her as an artisan, although that is our go-to type by default.
Yeah. Right. I mean, in general, in the entertainment business, there's the overwhelming majority are artisan types. Although as I've said before, I think there's a larger than average contingent of idealist types. I think,
yeah, especially ENFP.
Acting and songwriting both attract a pretty large amount of NF types compared to some other industries. And of course, as if Kersey, Dave himself were here to point it out, there's always a large amount of guardians in almost everything. So they're just by default, because they're the more there's going to be some, just because there's always some.
Yeah, there's going to be some, but it's going to be, especially in the creative arts, because it's not a reliable career. There's not going to be as many guardians, but there will be.
Yeah, but I think usually the ones you find are the ones that have stayed in the same jobs for decade after decade and been steady at whatever that particular thing is, because they'd rather have that type of job.
Or maybe a family tradition as well. Like, I mean, perhaps was there some of that with Jay Leno? I mean, is there anything in his family towards entertainment?
I don't know. I know his parents aren't, because he's talked about his parents quite a bit, and that they didn't like him getting into the comedy business because they didn't think it was. They thought it was too unpredictable, or too not a good way to make a living or anything like that. But I think, he's a good example in the sense that when he got the Tonight Show, he didn't stay there as long as Carson did. But then when he left the show, he didn't end up wanting to leave. He wanted to get to still be basically doing something like that. So he ended up going back after all that. It was kind of messy, but that was, it showed that he really didn't want to go. So
was that one where Jay Leno left for a bit and then
Conan O'Brien took over.
Conan O'Brien came in, and then he had that massive severance deal.
Yeah, it was a weird situation, but the point, of it is basically like he entered into the deal to exit the job too soon. That he never really wanted to do that, but there was some pressure from the network, and he felt like, well, I'll be this, whatever this age is at the time I signed it. Well, so maybe I'll want to retire, or I'll do something else, So he went along with it, even though he didn't really want to. But I think that, in general, like I said, in entertainment, I would guess that most Guardians Entertainment, you can find them if you look to the people that have been doing the same job day in, day out for a long time.
Yeah, and I would say some logistical things you can see Guardians involved with, those kind of things where it's a steady job, but there's not going to be as many. Although I know, and I think, and if there is a Guardian involved, there's a chance, especially in the performing area, you probably go for ESFJ. Because I remember Dave saying that, I think he said ESFJ is the Guardian that's most like an artisan.
In some ways, probably.
Yeah, but especially say you might get an ESFJ singer or actress. So,
I think one thing I've noticed, because I watch soap operas and stuff, is that the ESFJ soap opera characters, because there's sort of a tendency, I don't know if it's just sort of the genre, where most of the action happens from the artisan characters initiating things, and the Guardian characters mostly are sort of like the ones that their lives are in upheaval because of the artisan characters. So when there is a guardian character that is the one that's causing the trouble, then they tend to appear very leaning in the artisan direction, because that's sort of like
gotcha.
The template of this is how something happens. But if you really analyze their behavior, then you see that they don't have the same motivations, if they're well written at all, which a good example of that, a longtime daytime character, was Erica Kane on All My Children, played by Susan Lucci, because she's an ESFJ character that, if anyone just looked at the surface, they looked at her stats, you might say, and be like, oh, she got married like 12 times or something and had all these other, affairs or whatever. Oh, it sounds like an artisan thing. But if you really look at the character, her motivations for all the things that she did in all these situations, she's almost comes across as like the prototype for the kind of spoiled ESFJ character. So.
Yeah, and also it's what's conventional. I mean, it's like, if the convention is like these days for people who have so many marriages, it's not like ESFJ in a time where divorce was really frowned upon.
Yeah, and it's, her character is not one that, when you see her doing all this stuff like that, she cares about her image and her business and all these things. And yes, she is like sort of falls in love with these different men and stuff like that, but she's not like seeking out adventure. It's not the same type of thing where she's not ever, like, oh, yeah, she might get bored with the man she's with, but it's not this thing where she's constantly seeking some sort of drama in her life. It just sort of just seems to happen based on her choice.
So it might be a little bit like, in terms of Enneagram, sort of sexual instinct, Enneagram 2 kind of thing. So for those people out there that like functions, maybe people could say that about artisans with the low NI, the B-side NI, in terms of like not being able to see, not being able to predict things, whereas the NJs think they can predict things. They have a vision of, or rather, let's put it differently, they have a vision of how things will play out, rather than having a mystical power.
Well, yeah, and like you said before, I think in general, like, artisans that are not people that, among the small number of people who study Jungian stuff,
yeah,
most likely tell you that they do in general like things to be unpredictable and spontaneous. So they're not looking to predict the future for the most part. Or if they do, it's in specific ways, like those that are into a certain thing, like horoscopes or tarot cards or things like that, that are like a particular thing that has an element of future prediction in it. But that may just be either a hobby or something they make money off of, or whatever the thing may be.
Yeah, I mean, if you take gambling out of it, I mean, an artisan that knew exactly what, if you had an artisan character, and it's like, say you had a mischievous supernatural being, I am going to curse this artisan with the power of knowing everything's going to happen. It's like there would never be any surprises, and they would know everything, and I could see them getting bored with that, and they take advantage of it, and then eventually just become bored. No surprises there for them.
That one dude in Twilight Zone that got bored after a month of having whatever he wants. So,
yeah, I mean, it's like, it should have been a bit longer. Anyway, yeah. So there was there was quite a lot of good lines. Like, I like the "Oh no, not the eyeballs" from Bobby.
He said something like he can deal with everything else, and that's the one thing that he didn't want to.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I'm a bit squeamish myself. And then there was a couple of quite INTP-ish lines from Eve. It may not be a positive reflection on you that you are repelled by an abundance of desirable characteristics. And then I think this one was more INTP. The content and prose style are insubstantial. I believe it is what is called a puff piece. That sounds INTP to me. It's like, oh, and then there was something that I had been thinking about that I sort of noted when it's like, why does she need to eat? And at least they put that bit in there. I thought you didn't need to eat, and then she said, but I have an advanced taste mechanism. So
Yeah, I think they covered that in like the first or the second episode because I think it was the first, because she did tell him that she did eat, even though she didn't necessarily have to, but it was sort of part of her training that she needed to do all the things to fit in with human society. So she practiced doing that so that she wouldn't be like this thing that stood out as, oh, she doesn't eat, so people recognized her.
Yeah, blow her cover. Yeah. Of course,
another similarity to Data on Star Trek, because it was the same way with him. Like he didn't require food, but he was able to eat it for purposes.
Right. So there's a difference. Like if she were a cyborg, then she would need the food in order to power the organic part of her.
I like the look of that guy too. The wine dealer guy. Forgot his name.
I'll just go back a bit.
But he had an interesting look about him where
this guy, I'll just go back a bit.
Picture, but you know when he was first established, so I thought he was believable as that type of character. Like he was well designed character and well played. So
yeah,
she was convincing enough that she didn't come across as being like super suspicious when they first talked to her or anything like that.
Yeah, and I like the where is he? I like the little fella.
Yeah,
this guy. I think he played because that's the kind of part that could have been overdone.
Yeah, I agree. Curtis Armstrong is the actor. Yeah, Eric Easton was the character name.
There was a point where one of the things that happens with me is if I start getting a bit tired, then I start getting a bit harsher on whatever I'm watching because it takes me more to concentrate on the program. And there was like a section of like 5 to 10 minutes when they first went to the water plant where the plot started to bore me, and I think that was because the way the sound is, because it's a little bit, and I don't quite catch everything that's said because of the way the sound is. And I think I would have caught more of those little tiny plot details if it had subtitles on it. But I think that's just part of me. When I get tired, I always want to try and make sure when I watch these things I'm not tired, so then I enjoy it more.
I liked the bit about because of her superior vision, she was able to see the identification numbers on the ducks and know they were the same duck. That was a good use of her abilities. When she said the ducks are going to solve the case for us because she knew that she was lying about the ducks. But
she needs to keep that quiet though, because like if she goes around being observant all the while, people will say you can't be an INTP there. I think you're gynoid. Yeah.
That's one of my opportunities to ask you, because you're asking me the as an artisan question. So here's my question for you on that, because do you think it's similar in that in general you might not be seen as observant, but that when you're focused on particular elements, then you can actually be sometimes hyper observant where you pick up details nobody else does?
Yeah, it's that thing where it's people very much attentive to those things that they are interested in. So if you've got an NT if you've got anyone if you've got an INTP or INTJ that's really into computer, or an ISTP that's really interested in computer things, they're going to be very attentive to that field. I think what it is for INTPs is that most of life is like, it's like if it's the concrete stuff is like completely boring to them, and it's like if you ask them what was the color of the dress that she was wearing, or it's like, and if it now I would say if it's like just a woman that you're not like got any kind of reaction to, then it would be like, I don't know. It depends what kind of, it depends how attractive she was. So it's like it's again, because they're not paying attention to those types of things. But if it was, say, maybe the detail of an idea, they probably would remember that because they'd think about the idea and critique it. And so they might remember, say, the argument that, say, somebody used, and they'd think about the argument and all the problems with the argument, and then maybe what they would have said to counter it.
Right. So in a previous episode, we had a situation where Mann was focused more on the physical details, and Eve kind of missed it because she was thinking about these other kind of concepts. And in this episode, she's the one that noticed the ducks because from his standpoint, it was like, that's just some ducks in the water. It's not something to pay attention to. But she was focused on the concept of the effect of the water, the contamination of the water. And so that was a test case or a control factor to the water contamination thing. So that's why you should pay attention to it.
There's a thing that sort of goes beyond type in that, and actually Wojtek brought this up, is that if you've got an INTP that works in science, that makes you aware of facts and stuff and evidence and things like that, because you end up and you could almost say that science, a lot of science is very ST. It's like, what happened, what were the facts, and because she is, I mean, I think she's INTP, but it's like she's got this science background. She knows a lot of science stuff.
Well, I mean, so she's trained as a police detective, so obviously the entire police training of that is focused on the facts and the details of everything.
So it's just like what we've sort of done as a recurring theme, that someone's role enactment will change somebody, and so it's like she's almost in like, I mean, both of them are in a sort of inspector role to such an extent that that's what they call detectives in England, inspectors. So you've got a detective series that's called Inspector Wexford. So you could have a bit of stuff, and there is a bit to the average INTP. There's a bit of ISTJ in them. I don't know if you've noticed that, Jeff. Did you notice that in your brother? There's a bit of ISTJ maybe in INTP.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's what I'm pretty sure I told you when he first took the original Kersey sorter. That's what it showed him as, was ISTJ. And I think it's because of the questions, the NS questions, as we've talked about, sort of the flaws in them before, focusing so much on S being like about factual details versus N being sort of more fantasy imagination stuff. And even though my brother has a very healthy imagination, when presented in those kind of dichotomous ways, I think a lot of NTs will come off as S, the opposite of SFs, which will sometimes come off as Ns because they're more creative or imaginative, or that's what they focus on or prefer. So the questions lean the other direction, whereas NTs will sometimes come off as S's when they look at that. And the J thing, the same deal, is like, I think that even NTPs, as we've discussed this before, the concept of the wannabe J, that don't want to be seen as being, haphazard or not, together. They want to be efficient and have, be structured in that way. So even though the natural inclination is to be more spontaneous, they care more about sort of projecting an image of having things together, whereas SPs, I think, are less concerned with that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna get something that's that relates to this. There's a graphic of inside the here it is. There's a graphic of inside the head of the INTP, and hang on a moment. If I I just copy that and then put it in the other one. Paste. Right, if I go back to that, there we go. I think that's right. Oh, one moment. If I, because I want to close that one, because I want to make sure that it's the same from the correct folder. Oh, there we go. So we see here, they organize the stuff that's inside their heads. So they organize their knowledge in the proceeding, but the actual world, if they're not interested in it, it's like, what's the point? They want all of their theories and thinking and categories organized. So it's like, you might see that with the way I do notes in Curves, and it's like, because it's the way to remember it, but it's like, if it's not important to us, then we're not going to put the detail there.
Yeah, it's almost organization by over-organization. It's like you're trying to constantly categorize or sort of put things into these kind of diagrams and flowcharts and stuff like that, and then it's like they just keep extending in directions and making it more of a big mess.
Yeah, I mean, from the outside, it's like when I do like the Model V stuff, or before that when I did Victor Model G, and it's like getting it. But Dave does it as well, and it's like, okay, we're going to get our ideas across by doing a colourful diagram, and it's organising our ideas, organising what we're interested in.
Yeah.
But again, and I remember, you don't like him, or rather, you don't think. I'll try and be more accurate to what you said. You don't think he writes very good profiles of concrete types. That DA Gen guy, but he wrote a very good article about inner and outer judging, and he's like writing about, say, INTP being an inner judger and an external perceiver, and INTJ being an internal perceiver and an external judger. And I recently did a video with Haley where she was talking about what it was like inside her head, because she talked to her husband who's the same type, and it's like she was talking about most of her thinking is without words and other things. So it's like inside and the INTJs just won't tell you about this, is they really can be irrational inside their heads, but their behavior can be very rational and procedural. So I would say that MBTI got it right in terms of judging someone's external behavior for the JP stuff. Otherwise, the questions would be too difficult to write to try and get at someone's internal state. And even then, that wouldn't tell you anything about their external behavior, which is what we're interested in.
Yeah. Well, to me, I always look at that as the simplest way is just to go, you focus less on the habits and more on the preferences.
Yes.
But they have to be the right preferences. They have to be like, bottom line. And first of all, the person has to be honest.
Yes.
Completely, and self-aware, which is not always easy. Some people just sort of are in denial about themselves. But I mean, the preference is basically like, more like, would you rather, if you had some project to do, would you rather work to, you're going to do this exact part of the project on this day and this exact part on this day. Well, in other words, you're following to the letter a schedule. Or would you rather on each day just say, okay, this is the thing I need to be working on. I'll pick up where I left off and do what I feel like working on this particular project. You still want to finish the project. You don't want it to just be dropped or go by the wayside, but you don't want to necessarily say, I have to do steps 1, 2, 3 on Monday and steps 4, 5, 6 on Tuesday. That feels like more pressure than doing it as you get to it.
Yeah, but part of me thinks that I should do it like that.
Yeah, and that's kind of the point I was making earlier. You kind of sort of have this desire that you think you should or you're supposed to do it that way, but then if you really are honest about what you naturally would rather do, you'd rather just on a day-to-day basis just do what you felt like doing that day, even if there still believe there's a purpose behind it, but it's still your choice.
Yeah, it's just that I know that, like, because I always ask myself this question: what is the self-discipline thing to do? What is the discipline thing to do? Because, and it's like you've thought this before. If you just go with your preference, you know, you could be left homeless and foodless.
Right. But the very fact that you have to ask yourself that shows the difference between somebody who's naturally that way without having to do that. It would be the opposite. They would have to say what would be the undisciplined thing to do because without some sort of external factor, you know, I've talked about my father, of course, as being my first real example growing up of an INTJ. And when he was inebriated, that was obviously affected those things in terms of he was less disciplined. But even in that state, probably was more disciplined than some other people because he was able to retain some of that. Yeah. But without some sort of external thing like that that sort of intrudes in, then somebody who's really naturally a J type is just that's how they would, their entire being is already. They don't have to remind themselves or ask themselves.
Yeah, I do think with INTP, it's like if they're really passionate about something, they get more J about it. But you could also say that that might be with most people with the thing that they really enjoy. So, for instance, there are things that you really enjoy, Jeff, and you get really J about it. Oh, I'm going to watch it in this particular order. Like even when you're like watching your old stuff, it's like you wanted it to be in order.
I don't. It's funny because I don't even see it as being really a J thing. It's more like it's some sort of attempt to recreate the experience. And so, but we've talked about this before, where I do care about accuracy of things, but it's more like it's realism. Like I like things to be like reality. So even when I've attempted to, you know, create fantasy type situations, reality is always intruding on that. Because I'll think about something that didn't happen, you know, as a fantasy scenario, but it's set in the past for whatever reason. And whatever I'm imagining of this thing that didn't actually happen, then I'm like, well, no, that couldn't have happened that way because this other thing was happening at that time in reality. It's like there's no reason why it has to be realistic when it's a fantasy thing that didn't happen. But my brain so naturally tries to make it as realistic as possible. So I don't really think that's a J thing. I think if anything, maybe it's more of an S thing. Is just my brain can't accept a pure fantasy scenario. It always has to bring reality into it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like that as well. Like I get like, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I don't like 21st century TV Doctor Who. It's like I like to see it when it's like when I see that the writer is paying attention to and sticking to the rules of the world that they have built. And you could say that they did that in this science fiction series called The Expanse, where they built this world, had all these rules, and then they stuck to the rules of the world.
To me, my point was that it's me watching stuff in a particular time and saying, well, I need to watch it at the time, is not because I'm like, oh, I have to follow a schedule. It's more like the reality of this was, if I'm recreating the experience, this is the most realistic way to do that.
Right. So it might be, so it's like what looks like J behavior, but it's not for J reasons. It's
right.
for enjoyment reasons.
Well, this aired on a Wednesday. So if I'm watching it on a Friday, it feels like, well, this isn't right. Unless I sort of give the excuse to myself that, well, I recorded it on Wednesday. Now I'm watching it on Friday. But I have to do that to sort of justify it to myself. Otherwise, it feels like I'm not, it's unrealistic for some reason.
So when you were really into, say, baseball, and you would have like the Guardian baseball fans, and it's like they didn't understand when you suddenly lost your love for baseball.
Yeah, I had people that I knew at work that that was their small talk with me was always to try to bring up baseball stuff, and I no longer really cared about it as much. So it was kind of a struggle because I just wasn't really interested in what they were talking about.
Yeah, that seems to be a game that can get very. There's a lot in baseball that appeals to Guardians. The history and all the little details.
Well, and the funny thing about that part is that as I lost interest in baseball, and then when I got into as what we were just talking about, sort of the recreation of, media and stuff in general from the past, baseball was part of that. So then it sort of re-enabled me to have those conversations, but it's entirely about the past things, not about the current stuff. So
yeah,
the guy at work that I can still bring up past baseball stuff with, and other like sports and things from the past. So that's whenever we talk about that sort of thing now, it's about what was going on back then.
Right. So it also, another example might be, so someone that might look like ISTJ-ish kind of Guardian behavior would be like the way this character Bobby Mann, with his like baseball card collection and stuff. It's just that if you're really into anything, then you can look like, where it's like, oh, he's approaching it in the same way as Mr. Clean, alphabetizing all of the wallets and all of the stolen stuff. But it's like, no, it's just because he's passionate about this thing that you end up with a little bit of J-ish behavior, because it's within an interest one's passionate about. So, yeah. So I think I went over some lines. Yeah, there was some good lines in it. Yeah, it just, there was the bit when they first went to the water plant. There was just little bits that I kept missing in the, because it just sounds a little bit. Does it sound distorted to you? Because I think you've got more sensitive hearing than me.
I mean, not really. There are a few like kind of there were a few times where it sounded like there was a little bit of a distortion, but not like a big deal.
Yeah. Many times I have subtitles on. I don't think I'll lose concentration. At times, especially when it's, for me, it's like this series is not really about the plot. For me, I don't find the plots interesting. I find her reaction to the plots interesting, and the character interaction. So maybe I'm not paying as much attention to although I worked out about halfway through that the water is going to go to the guy with the bottling plant thing. Especially when you realize it's a series that tends to have everything relevant.
Well, and they showed that in the if your copy had the opening, they showed scenes from the episode anyway, so they are.
Oh no, but what I do though is I deliberately cover my eyes. I covered my eyes as the end, because I don't like that when they did it on Battlestar Galactica. It's like it's a spoiler.
I would prefer it also, because that was how I knew, like in the scene where he's getting covered in the water, I knew he wasn't going to die because he hadn't said the line yet that they had in the promo thing.
Yeah,
it's that line he delivered about like I can't remember what he said, but
that's insidiously clever or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Like, and he hadn't said that yet, so I'm like, okay, I know he can't get too messed up by this because he hasn't said that yet.
Yeah, I mean, it happens around. It's like, yeah, and I predicted the thing with the watch. And yeah, you got his like artisan cynicism.
I actually like the fact that he explained the watch thing right afterwards, so it wasn't left as that it was supposed to be this this mysterious thing, that he had been sloppy about that.
Yeah.
He said right away, it was like, yeah, I did that on purpose to bait him. So
yeah. But there was that little bit though where like he was putting his life in danger if he wasn't sure, and it's like, yeah, but I don't like him anyway. But so, but yeah, so I thought.
Again, he chose to tell him that the water was contaminated just to mess with him.
Yeah, a little bit of artisan there, couldn't resist it. Yeah. Yeah, so something Eve mentioned was interesting when she said that she thought that I mean, I'm just going to get the guy. It'll be
the only other thing I would say, the guy that's
that
already
guy.
the ex or whatever, for him to think it was a good idea to take off running at that point, like he probably should know better. When they were going to arrest him, he should have just said, been like, okay, shut up and wait for my lawyer kind of thing. The idea that he was going to gain advantage by running away at that point was pretty stupid. So,
yeah. But he could have turned to the camera and said, well, we need an action sequence.
Well, yeah.
Something stupid.
I always go back to Pimbleton's line about crime makes you stupid, but I still feel like the situation, he knows the drill, so I feel like he wouldn't have done that, but,
yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, some people could do stuff when they're scared. Like people would just like
and they didn't really establish whether or not he had the hots for the girl or not, and maybe if he was following her lead, he was trying to stay in with her, but I don't know. It's tough to tell. They didn't really establish that.
Right, gotcha. So Eve said something about this, that she thought this guy, when she said that he said negative things about women, and that was during that section where I wasn't paying that much attention because I was feeling a bit tired. And then she said that, we might need to talk about that because like the kind of things that Bobby doesn't notice.
Mm-hmm.
It was just that period of 5 to 10 minutes where I sort of lost a little bit of interest in the plotty details because I was missing little bits in the dialogue.
Well, I would say that was probably the weakest part of the episode anyway.
Yeah.
The whole bit about like trying to fool him that they were working for a congressman. Like they almost could have not even had that part and the rest of the episode still would have made sense. So it almost seemed like they just couldn't figure out how to make that transition and had to throw something in there. That was kind of...
I mean, it like the denouement, the unknotting, it all became much clearer. But there was a period there in about towards the end of the first third where the plot got a bit murky for me in terms of like, but they were able to unknot it all to make it all. And so from a technical point of view, they were able to make most of the elements of the plot make sense down the line as it went along. But there was a...
Yeah, and to me, like I said, I thought the pacing was good in the sense that there wasn't a lot of time to really be thinking about that. It just sort of like things went from one to the other without a whole lot of downtime, in my opinion. Yeah. So it's one of those things where if there is a plot hole, then they covered it quickly enough because they just kept going with the story. So,
although I am watching this slightly differently from you because I'm taking these screenshots as I'm going along, it takes me longer to get through the episode.
Yeah.
And so I'm doing a lot of...
obviously, I can't tell you what to do, but, I'd recommend maybe you just watch the whole thing at once and then just do it again to take the pictures. I mean, I realize that might take even longer, but it might actually not, because if you're the first time through, you're not focused on trying to get pictures of everything, you might, it might be easier actually to pay attention.
Yeah. Because then because when I'm stopping it and then I'm going back and I'm rewinding 10 seconds and it's like, so for instance, I wrote down, it is me being a bit Jay writing it down in my diary. So I watched it from my time, 4:21 to 6:09 is how much time I spent watching the episode. Pausing it, and there's things like that. I get distracted. But most of it was spent on that, going through it bit by bit. I don't know if there may have been some distractions in there, I'm not sure. Right then. So, I give it about 8 out of 10, this episode.
I would also give it an 8 out of 10. And this is the point where the show was put on hiatus back in 1992. So I think if I remember right, there's actually a 5-week break in between this one and the next episode, because it aired on June 9th, which was actually a Wednesday, I believe. So we would be doing it on the following weekend. So I believe it's 5-week break, if I remember right. So
yeah, I might be able to do a little. I might be able to do something a little bit fancy. I might be able to give the audience a little preview of Kappa 2.
So join us next week for Kickapoo Creek or whatever this thing's called.
Yeah. I'm going to try to do a little preview. I'm going to try and show a clip.
Joey Jojo, Junior Shabadoo.
Yeah. I'm going to try and show a clip
Krakatoa.
Of it without it like. I'm going to try and show a sample.
Met him, all right? Some mate. So let's get on with it.
Observe the screen. We'll start with a two-dimensional grid.
Go on.
You have a call coming through.
A call? What do I do?
Please.
So he's from 1991. No, he's from the year 1990, and he's switched places with his time twin from about the year 2400.
Give the usual greeting, Heidi Hey.
Heidi, hey?
How did that happen?
Oh, great, you can hear me.
Of course I can, I'm not deaf.
Listen, Simon, I've been thinking. Why don't you look at me?
Because I can't see you, dorkhead. Anyway, listen, I want to swap back. I've done your exam, written a brilliant programme, and I want to...
No way. What are you talking about? I can't hack it here. I'm exhausted. I'm dying. And I'm expected to play football tomorrow. It'll do me and it'll kill me. You've got to swap back. I'm sorry, but I'm staying here until I've beaten Sigma 6. And wrap the hypergrid round his sneering face. Anyway, I fancy move for. Bye.
On my end, it's got a copy, but I don't know what we did on the...
Yeah, anyway, so that before we have copyright problems, that's just a little sample for people. Hopefully that doesn't cause
Like
problems.
I said, on my end, it's got a copy, so I don't really know what they were saying, but
Okay.
hopefully on the actual recorded video, it didn't do that.
Right, okay. So it'll be interesting to get your live reaction to it. So maybe I could be there whilst you watch it and then we can review it afterwards. So to recap,
Yeah, I'll figure out when it takes me to do that. Is that because, I mean, I guess first you got to actually like send me the thing or show me where it is or something. So.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'll anyway, we'll talk about that off air. So yeah, 8 out of 10 from me, 8 out of 10 from Jeff, and I'm just going to end the broadcast now, and then we'll talk about the logistics